So, how can you manage stress over long periods of time? Find out today on this episode of IncreMental Health Tips. Welcome to IncreMental Health Tips. My name is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Liz. Today, we're going to be discussing how to manage stress over a long period of time, because in case anyone out there doesn't know, the past year and a half or so have been pretty stressful for a lot of people. And so, Liz, let's just get right into it. So, how do we manage stress over a long period of time?
Well, I do think this is something that people struggled with even before the pandemic because, if you have a family member who's ill or if, you're dealing with a big transition like a divorce, you could be dealing with stress for quite an extended period of time in order to make the adjustments. And sometimes that even comes with a sense of grief, which makes it a bit more complex. But I do think it's important to find ways to take care of yourself in the midst of a stressful experience. So doing small little things to help you take care of yourself and find some enjoyment in the midst of that stress can really help to reduce those feelings of stress.
And obviously, the things we do to care for ourselves are things that are ultimately healthy. Like, for example, if you have a lot of stress around finances, maybe going to the movies isn't your best way of coping, but maybe exercising is a better way. So as well, one thing I wanted to touch on is, and it can make such a big difference, is where we focus. So when things are really stressful, when we focus on things that we focus on the stress or we focus on negative things, that tends to be what we live out. So, focusing on the positive things happening around you and learning to recognize them can make a really big difference too.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've started doing this year just to help keep my mind focused on the positive is I've been keeping a gratitude journal. So every day I try to write down something positive that happened. And sometimes what I write is that I'm thankful to get to the end of the day. So just having some sort of positive spin to put on things can really help shift your mind to hold on to those positive moments instead of just letting them pass by.
No, that's true. And even if, the negative aspects of the day outweigh the positive, it's so easy just to ignore the positive things that have happened. As well, focusing on these positive things can really help us overcome the impacts of stress. I mean, there are a lot of ways stress can actually impact us. Just thinking, going back to my background in health, stress can actually impact. It can lower our immune system. It can obviously exacerbate mental health problems and mental illness. It can also make you tired. So stress is something that we need to manage. Otherwise, it can manifest into really negative physiological impacts even.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that as I've been working with other professionals over the past year, they've said people's mental health symptoms are worse. If they had anxiety, it's more severe this year. And, stress does make you tired. So if you're feeling tired because you've had more on your plate, that's a totally normal reaction. And so I think it's important to make sure that people give themselves credit for the things that they're able to get done instead of focusing on those things that they didn't get done. A lot of times, we'll get 9 out of 10 things done on our to-do list and we'll focus on that one thing we didn't get done and beat ourselves up over it instead of actually looking at, well, I did 9 out of 10, so that's actually pretty good. And I mean, depending on how time-consuming things are, you might only end up getting one thing done, but if that was what you needed to get done, then you need to focus on, I did this really important thing.
Well, having your priorities in order certainly helps with that process, because then you can, focus on the more important things that you were able to get done. With me personally, something I've always known is, at any given time, there may be a dozen things on my list of things I've got to do, and each one of those things in and of themselves are quite manageable, but taken all together, maybe less manageable. So focusing on sort of the compound, burden that our to-do list has on us, because while each of these tasks is something that I could very easily do if there were 37 hours in a day, but by focusing on the fact that I only can do a certain amount of time and budgeting my time, I found that to be really helpful, because if I've put in a good solid 9-hour work day and didn't get everything done, well, then that's not my lack of effort, that's the amount of work.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's been helpful to me is I used to focus a lot on, well, these several things didn't get done, and I know I didn't have time to do them because I was busy doing other things that had to get done, and recognizing that, you've also got other things to do, and so we can't always get to everything that needs to be done, and focusing on, well, we're both working hard and we're a team in that working hard. I think that is one of the things that's helped to strengthen our marriage.
Well, as well, we have a lot while we're, expanding our resources on setting goals and how to manage goals. So a lot of the input and advice we give in those episodes can really come into play here, because that can help reduce your stress, because sometimes things are a lot harder because we make them harder by having a poor approach or a bad process.
Or unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, expectations are pretty big.
Yeah.
Although realistic expectations and pessimism, though, are too often confused. But that's maybe another
episode for another time.
The other thing I really wanted to touch on before we run out of time is, the study that we touched on in another episode. Now, the study was unethical, so let's just be clear about that up front. But what the study was it was done by Facebook, and Facebook actually manipulated the news feeds of various users, and some news feeds, they populated only things that were positive in nature, and other users, they only put negative stories or negative statuses in their news feeds, and they monitored these people's own news feeds to see how their surroundings impacted the things that they posted, and they actually found that, significant impact, that when the people who were surrounded by negativity were much more negative than those surrounded by positivity. So limiting ourselves, trying to control what we can about our environment and limiting our negativity is just really crucial. Is that something you've seen play out with your clients in therapy?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've taught during my education sessions is to limit your amount of exposure to the news. And one of the clients replied back to me after a couple weeks had passed, and he repeatedly thanked me for suggesting that he not spend all his time watching the news, because he realized that he's a lot more positive and able to enjoy life more by not having so much exposure to it. And you really do have other ways of finding out what's going on and what you need to know without watching the news every day.
That doesn't mean don't stay informed about what's going on, but also taking what's informed in context. I mean, as we come to the conclusion of our time, ultimately the main tip we want to give our listeners on managing stress over long periods of time is to ultimately focus on what they can control. We can't control what's going on with global pandemics or economic situations or natural disasters. These are things that are important to know about, but we can't actually control them. We can only control how we respond to them.
And there's a lot of things in life where you have very limited control. And I think each point that we've tried to bring up today tries to focus you on things that are still within your control, even when you're facing a period of time that's especially stressful.
And as we often say, that really big changes they occur with really small steps. We are incremental health tips because we believe that really small incremental changes that are intentional can make really big differences. A lot of people don't even approach change because they're too intimidated by it, or they think it's too big of a step, or that they're not ready for it. But the truth is, just by focusing on the things you can control about helps you manage your attitude and your expectations and reduce your stress in relation to the things that you can't control. That's all the time we have for today, but if you enjoy our content, please like, share, and subscribe. We upload new full podcast episodes every Tuesday at 11 p.m. Eastern. And remember, small steps lead to big changes, and we'll see you next time.